The ocean was calm, but the people on the Navy ship were not. Something was wrong, very wrong. The ship, named Titanus, was one of the largest and most powerful in the fleet. It was in the middle of a special mission far away from land, carrying hundreds of crew members, cargo, and top-secret equipment. Everything had been going smoothly until suddenly. The engine stopped, the lights flickered, the fans slowed down, and the ship came to a slow, quiet stop in the middle of the sea. A thick silence followed, broken only by the confused voices of the crew. Everyone ran to their stations, trying to understand what just happened. Alarms didn't go off, nothing exploded, but the engine was completely dead. It was like the heart of the ship had stopped beating. The chief engineer, a man with 20 years of service, rushed down to the engine room with his team. They checked the fuel systems, the control panels, the wiring. Everything looked normal. But the engine wouldn't start, not even a sound. He tried the backup systems, but those were dead too. It made no sense. The engine was checked just 3 days ago, and it was working perfectly, above deck. Admiral Haro stood on the command bridge, his hands behind his back, his eyes staring at the endless water ahead. He looked calm on the outside, but inside he was worried. He had served the Navy for over 35 years. He had seen ships take damage, lose power, and sink, but this felt different. It felt like the ship itself was holding its breath. The Admiral was not a man who panicked easily. He called for immediate support. Experts were flown in by helicopter from the nearest coastal base. Some of the brightest engineers arrived, men and women who had built engines for years. They came with laptops, scanners, and tools, confident they could fix anything. But after hours of testing, checking, and scanning, their faces began to change. Nothing was wrong, but nothing worked. The systems were unresponsive. The engine's core was untouched. It was like trying to wake someone from sleep, only to realize they were not asleep at all, but in some strange kind of shutdown. Some experts suggested towing the ship back, but it would take days, and the mission couldn't wait that long. The Admiral dismissed them all and returned to his quarters. There, in a small drawer, he pulled out a file that had been untouched for years, a folder with old paper notes, hand-drawn, engine maps, and a name written across the top in faded ink. Chief Engineer Rayan Solis. Rayan had served on this ship years ago, back when the Titanus was first launched. He was a legend, a man who could fix machines with just his ears and hands. No computers needed. But Rayan was dead. He had passed away nearly a decade ago after an accident in a testing facility. The Navy honored him, but his knowledge died with him, or so everyone thought. The Admiral flipped through the papers until he found a small sticky note inside the folder. It had a name written in careful handwriting: Lena Solis, Rayan's daughter. Underneath, just one word: apprentice. The Admiral sat back in his chair. Deep in thought, he remembered Rayan's stories about his daughter. She used to follow him everywhere, even to the engine rooms. While other kids played with toys, she played with bolts and wrenches. Rayan used to laugh and say, "She be better than me someday." But after Rayan died, the Navy didn't keep in touch with his family. Years passed, and no one heard of her again. Now, with a dead ship and no hope, the Admiral made a decision. He picked up the old phone and dialed a number no one expected him to call. He asked command to find Lena Solis, daughter of the late Rayan Solis, and bring her to the ship immediately. Meanwhile, down in the engine room, the chief engineer sat on the floor, wiping sweat from his face. It's like the engine doesn't want to be fixed. He whispered to himself. Others nodded quietly. There was no error to correct, no broken part to replace, just silence, heavy and strange, like the ship was hiding something back on shore in a small harbor town. A woman in her late 20s was working under a fishing boat, grease on her hands, wrench between her teeth. Her name was Lena Solis, and she was known as the best mechanic in the area. She never asked for much, didn't talk about her past, and didn't wear a uniform. But inside, she carried something few people had: the old ways of listening to machines. That day, her boss ran up to her with a confused face, saying someone from the Navy was calling. She took the call, annoyed at first, but when she heard the name of the ship tightened, her fingers froze. The voice on the line said only this: "The Admiral requests your presence. Your father once saved this ship. We hope you can do the same." She hung up the phone and stared at the sea for a long time. The last time she saw the Titaness, she was only a girl holding her father's hand. Watching him walk onto the ship one last time, she never got to say goodbye. And now, the ship had called her back, not with words, but with silence. She took a deep breath, packed her bag, and said only one thing to her boss before leaving. "If the ship is broken, I'll fix it," she whispered. "If it's scared, I'll listen." And with that, Lena Solis boarded a small Navy transport, heading toward the silent metal beast her father once loved, not knowing the truth that waited inside its heart. Lena sat quietly inside the Navy transport ship, the seat beneath her vibrating with every bump in the air. She stared out the window, watching the clouds roll by. Her bag rested on her lap, still stained with oil from the last boat she worked on. She hadn't changed clothes, hadn't even combed her hair. There hadn't been time. Or maybe she just didn't care. Her mind was full of thoughts, memories of her father, questions about the ship, and a strange feeling in her chest that she couldn't explain. When the call first came, she thought it was a joke. Why would the Navy call her after so many years of silence? They didn't care when her father died, didn't send help when she was left alone. And now, suddenly, they wanted her. She almost said no, but something inside her stopped her hand from hanging up the call. She didn't do it for the Navy. She did it for her father. As the transport flew over the sea, she could see the massive gray body of the Titaness ahead, floating like a sleeping giant. It looked just like she remembered, only older, more tired, a mix of sadness and respect filled her heart. That ship had been her father's second home. Now it was broken, helpless, and calling for someone, maybe her. The ship landed on the top deck of Titaness, where sailors stood waiting, stiff and formal. One of them led her to the Admiral's office without saying much. She walked with steady steps, ignoring the strange looks people gave her. She wasn't in uniform, she wasn't famous, and she wasn't a man. But she held her head high, because she was Rayan Solis's daughter, and that meant something inside the office. Admiral Harrow stood by the window, his back to her. He didn't speak at first, just stared out at the ocean. After a few seconds, he turned around and looked at her. His eyes were old and tired, but still sharp. He studied her face like he was searching for something familiar. "You look like him," he finally said. "Like your father." Lena didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. The Admiral walked over to his desk and handed her the same folder he had opened the night before. Inside were her father's notes, hand-drawn engine sketches, and one photo of the two of them together when she was just a child. She touched the photo gently, her fingers trembling. He was the only one who truly understood this engine. The Admiral said he added things, changed things, made it better. But now, no one can figure out what he did. "You want me to fix it?" she asked, still looking at the photo. "No," he said softly. "I want you to talk to it." Those words made her pause. Her father used to say the same thing. Machines talk, Lena. You just have to listen. She never thought she'd hear someone else say it, especially not a man in charge of warships. Without another word, she closed the folder, stood up, and asked to be taken to the engine room. The Admiral nodded and ordered a crewman to lead her there. As they walked through the long metal halls, she could feel the mood around her. Sailors watched from corners. Engineers whispered behind her back. Some looked curious, others annoyed. She didn't care. She wasn't there for them when she entered the engine room. Everything went quiet. The space was massive, full of pipes, tanks, and wires, blinking lights and dead screens. The air smelled like old fuel and burnt metal. Her boots echoed as she stepped forward. The chief engineer looked up from his tools. Surprised to see her, "You must be the girl," he said, not hiding the doubt in his voice. "I'm not a girl," Lena replied, her voice calm. "I'm an engineer." The man laughed a little, but moved aside, letting her pass. She didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for instructions. She dropped her bag, rolled up her sleeves, and stood silently in front of the engine core. Everyone else watched her, waiting to see what she would do. But Lena didn't touch anything. Not yet. She closed her eyes and listened. Not with her ears, but with memory. She remembered sitting beside her father as he fixed boats and engines. She remembered how he would hum quietly, how he would talk to the machines like they were alive. She remembered the sound of steam, the pressure of bolts, the rhythm of a healthy engine. This one wasn't dead, it was afraid, hiding, waiting. She opened her eyes and moved toward a small access panel on the side. It looked normal, but something about it felt off. She pressed her fingers along the edge and found a tiny bump-pan old-style mechanical release. Hidden from sight, unknown to anyone else, with a twist and a pull, the panel opened. Inside were hand-marked wires, tiny switches, and something even more unexpected, a small wrench with her father's initials carved into it. Her breath caught in her throat. The wrench had been hers once, a gift from him. How did it end up here? "This engine doesn't need fixing," she said aloud. "It needs remembering." No one replied. Some rolled their eyes, others just stared. But she didn't care. She picked up the wrench, wiped it on her sleeve, and turned to the crew. "Need everyone to leave," she said firmly. "I work alone." The chief engineer laughed again, but the Admiral's voice came over the intercom. "Do as she says." The crew slowly filed out, one by one, until only Lena was left in the engine room, surrounded by silence and memories. She looked around at the machine her father had once touched, and felt like he was still there, watching her, guiding her hands. And as she began to remove the first cover plate, she whispered to the engine, just like he used to. "I'm here now, Papa," she said. "Let's talk." Lena stood alone in the engine room, the heavy door now closed behind her. The silence was thick, only broken by the quiet ticking of cooling metal and the distant sound of the ocean pressing against the ship's hull. She placed her hands on the edge of the engine casing and breathed in the smell of old oil, burnt metal, and dust. It felt like stepping into a memory. She walked slowly around the room, touching pipes, tapping panels with her fingers. She wasn't checking them in the normal way engineers did. She was feeling, sensing, listening for something deeper. This wasn't just a broken machine. Something else was going on. And in her heart, she felt like her father had left a message behind, hidden inside the ship, waiting for her outside the engine room. The engineers who had been dismissed were gathered in the hallway. Some leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Others whispered among themselves. Most of them thought it was a waste of time. One of them, a tall man with sharp eyes, scoffed and said, "What does she think she's doing? Praying to it?" But one younger crewman looked uneasy. He had seen something in Lena's eyes when she first touched the engine, something calm and certain. "She didn't look like she was guessing," he muttered. "She looked like she knew inside." Lena had opened 3 small panels hidden deep behind the main structure. Each one had her father's old markings, tiny scratches shaped like arrows. They weren't standard symbols, but she remembered them from childhood. He had taught her to mark machines like that when she was just 8, so she followed the marks like a trail of breadcrumbs. She reached a narrow crawl space under the engine platform and slid in. It was hot, cramped, and smelled like metal dust, but at the far end, just as she expected, there was a cover plate with another symbol. this one shaped like a crescent moon. That had been her nickname, Moonbeam, what her father always called her. Lena's hand shook slightly as she removed the bolts and pulled the panel off. Behind it, hidden in the dark, was something no one else had seen. An old-style mechanical junction box. It didn't match the ship's new design. This wasn't in any blueprint. 'Twas her father's own creation. The box had switches, wires, and a small dial. But what caught her eye was a folded note tucked into the corner, carefully wrapped in waterproof plastic. She pulled it out and opened it slowly. The handwriting was rough, but she recognized it instantly, her father's. The note read, "If you're reading this, then they called you because they don't understand this ship. Doesn't need fixing, it needs trust. I built this engine to protect the tightness. Not just run it. When it senses danger, it locks down, hides. Waits for someone who understands the old ways." Lena read the note 3 times. Her father had built a kind of safety mode into the engines, something advanced, something emotional. The engine could detect threats and respond on its own. But only someone who understood how it was wired could wake it up again. That's why the other experts failed. They treated it like a broken machine. But it wasn't broken. It was scared, confused, maybe even angry. She whispered to herself, "It's like waking a sleeping giant." Carefully, she adjusted the switches. Inside the box, not with modern scanners or programs, but by hand, her father's design used rhythm, pressure, and balance, not just code. She moved like a musician playing a quiet tune, trusting her instincts, trusting her memory. Suddenly, a low hum filled the space around her. The engine gave a slow, deep vibration just once, but it was enough to make her stop moving and hold. Her breath, it was like the ship had sighed, not from pain, but from recognition. She whispered again, "You know me, don't you?" The lights in the room stayed dim, the fans didn't spin. But she felt a change in the air. The engine wasn't sleeping anymore. It was listening outside. The Admiral was standing in the hallway, watching the time pass. He had been quiet. For hours, ignoring every message from command. Ignoring the rising pressure from the fleet. They wanted answers, wanted action. But he only said one thing. "Wait." One of the junior officers approached him. "Sir, it's been too long. Maybe we should." The Admiral held up his hand, stopping the words. "If she fails, we lose the ship anyway. If she succeeds, then we owe a debt to a man we forgot." Back in the engine room, Lena returned to the center console. She tapped on a display screen with her wrench knot to fix it, to feel its weight. Then she knelt down beside the base of the engine, placed her hand on the metal, and said softly, "It's me, Moonbeam. I'm here now. Papa sent me. You can trust me." A deep sound came from the engine. Not a roar, not a rattle, but a low, steady hum. It grew louder, smoother, almost like a heartbeat. The walls trembled slightly. Lights blinked twice, then stabilized. The power wasn't fully back, but something inside the ship had changed. Lena stood up slowly, her eyes wide, her chest tight with emotion. "It's waking up," she whispered. "It remembers." She didn't rush, didn't call the others. Back in, she wanted to be sure, to let the engine feel safe again. She sat down on the floor beside the machine and leaned back. Resting her head against the warm metal, tears slid down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from something deeper, like she had just spoken to her father through steel and memory. And, in the quiet room, with oil on her hands and dust in her hair, she whispered one more thing. "I missed you." Lena stayed close to the engine, listening to its slow hum as it returned to life. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was steady. Like a heartbeat beginning to beat again after a long rest, her fingers ran across the metal surface, remembering. Every lesson her father had taught her, not from books, but from touch, feeling, and trust. This wasn't just engineering. It was something personal, something alive. The note from her father lay folded in her pocket. And she could still hear his voice in her mind. He had once told her, "Machines are like people. Moonbeam, if they're scared, they shut down. You have to make them feel safe." She didn't fully understand it back then, but now, in this moment, she did, completely. The engine room had always been loud when she was younger, filled with tools, clanking, and voices shouting. But now it was quiet, peaceful, almost sacred. The engine was listening, watching her, waiting for the next step. Lena stood up and looked at the main console again. Oh, yes. She didn't press any buttons or flip any switches. Instead, she followed the markings her father had left hidden over the years. A triangle scratched next to a pipe, a line carved beside. A switch, all tiny messages only she could recognize. He had left this path for her, just in case. She opened a second hidden panel near the floor. This one was covered in dust and hadn't been touched in years. Inside were older controls manual. Ones not connected to the ship's central system. These were part of the override her father had designed, a way to give the engine full control without letting anyone interfere. She turned one dial slowly, then pulled a lever gently downward. The hum of the engine grew deeper, then stopped for one long second. She held her breath, fearing she had done something wrong. Then, suddenly, a quiet click echoed in the room, followed by a low vibration running through the floor. Lights along the walls flickered back on. One by one, the fans began to spin, slowly at first, then faster. The screens lit up with soft glows of blue and green. It was working. Outside the engine room, the chief engineer jumped as lights flickered above him. "What the?" he said, looking toward the sealed door. "Did she?" He ran to the control station and checked the readings. Everything was waking up. The pressure lines were steady, the heat levels normal. The ship's main systems were starting to respond again. The Admiral received the report within minutes. A junior officer ran into his office, face pale, but eyes wide. "Sir, the engine room is live again." He said, "She did something, but we don't know what." Admiral Harrow stood up slowly. His voice calm but serious. "Open the door. Let's see what the dead have taught the living." When the heavy door of the engine room opened, Lena was still sitting on the floor. She didn't look up right away. She was resting, tired but calm. Her hands were dirty, her face sweaty. But her eyes were clear, full of something no scanner could measure. Connection. The Admiral stepped inside, followed by a few silent engineers. No one spoke. They just looked around, watching the lights, hearing the fans, feeling the air moving again. It was like the ship had taken its first breath in days. "You brought it back," the Admiral said softly. Almost to himself, Lena looked up at him, her voice quiet but steady. It was never dead. It was hiding. He knelt beside her, surprised by how young she still looked, despite the strength in her eyes. "How did you know what to do?" he asked. She reached into her pocket and handed him the folded note. "My father told me," she said, "years ago. Before he died, he told me stories. He didn't just build this engine. He gave it feelings, reactions. He didn't want it to be controlled like a weapon. He wanted it to protect the ship, even from itself." The Admiral read the note slowly, his hands shaking just a little. When he finished, he looked at the engine with new eyes. "We never understood what he built," he whispered. "We tried to control it, command it, but we never listened." Lena nodded. "Machines don't obey fear. They obey trust." The chief engineer stepped forward. Still looking shocked, "You bypassed the main controls. You used systems that aren't in the manual." She stood up and faced him, her tone gentle but firm. "Because those systems weren't made for you. They were made for someone who remembered him. My father built this engine to be more than just parts and metal. He built it to think, to react, and yes, to choose who it listens to." Some engineers still didn't believe it. They thought maybe it was luck. Maybe she had guessed right, but the Admiral knew better. He saw it in her hands, her eyes. Her voice. This wasn't guessing. This was. Understanding, he turned to the team and said, "From now on, she's in charge of the engine." Gasps filled the room. Some engineers were angry, others confused. But no one argued. The ship was alive again. And everyone knew who brought it back. Later that night, Lena stood on the upper deck. Looking at the stars, the ship was moving again, slow but steady, and deep inside her, something had also started to move. For the first time in years, she felt close to her father, not just in memory, but in work, in spirit, in the engine that still carried his soul. And as the wind touched her face, she whispered quietly, "I did it, Papa. The ship remembers you, and now it knows me too." The tightness was moving again, but very slowly. The engine wasn't at full power, and Lena knew it needed more time to fully wake up. The emergency systems were still off, and the ship's long-range scanners hadn't come back online. Everyone on board felt some relief, but the Admiral wasn't ready to relax yet. He stood on the bridge, looking at the map screen. The ship had drifted closer to a dangerous zone during the breakdown waters known to be watched by enemy patrols. No one had fired at them yet, but it was only a matter of time. The mission they had been sent for was already delayed, and now they were in a vulnerable spot. Admiral Harrow turned to the communications officer. "Can we send a message to command?" he asked. The officer shook his head. "Not yet, sir. The signal array is still rebooting." The Admiral clenched his jaw, then walked over to the window, staring out at the sea. "We don't have days," he muttered. "We may not even have hours." Meanwhile, in the lower deck, Lena was back in the engine room, wiping oil from her arms and checking the secondary fuel lines. The engine was running, but something still felt off. It was like the ship was holding back, like it was waiting for something more. She sat near the control panel and closed her eyes again, not to rest, but to listen. Her father had always said machines had moods, not just problems. She placed one hand on the panel and the other on the wrench with his initials. Her breathing slowed, and she began to feel a pattern of vibration deep in the core. It was uneven, like a heartbeat skipping a beat every few seconds. That meant something was wrong inside the stabilizer coil. Not broken, just misaligned. And it was something only someone with her father's method could detect without instruments. She crawled under the main platform and opened a narrow access port. Inside, the coil was spinning too fast, out of sync with the power feed. She reached in, slowly, carefully, and used her wrench to adjust the balance. Just a few turns, gentle and exact. The engine gave a deep hum, lower and smoother than before. The lights above brightened slightly, and the floor stopped shaking. Now the engine wasn't just alive, was calm, balanced, ready. She smiled to herself. "You're not just a machine, are you?" She whispered. "You're part of him." Just then, a voice came through the engine room speaker. It was the Admiral. "Lena, report to the bridge immediately." She wiped her hands, threw on her jacket, and hurried upstairs on the bridge. The mood was tense. Officers stood at their stations, staring at radar screens and sensor panels. The Admiral looked serious, but calm, as always. "We've picked up an unknown vessel," he said, as she entered. "It's not answering our signals, and it's moving toward us fast." Lena's eyes narrowed. "Enemy?" "We don't know yet," the Admiral replied. "But we're in their territory, and our long-range defenses are offline. We need full power. Now," she nodded. "I can do that, but it will strain the system. We don't know how much power the core can handle in this state." The Admiral looked at her, his voice firm. "I trust your judgment. Do what you must." Lena ran back to the engine room and took a deep breath. She had to risk it. If the ship couldn't move faster, they would be sitting ducks. She adjusted the pressure valves and increased the power flow to the main turbines. The engines started to grow louder. The floor trembled. The lights flickered, but it held steady. Then she did something bold. She activated her father's final override switch. The one he had only mentioned once when she was 12. Use it only when you have no choice, he had said. Because it gives everything the engine has. She pulled the switch, and the entire room lit up with a soft blue glow. It was like the ship took a breath and then exhaled fire. On the bridge, the ship surged forward, gaining speed faster than anyone expected. Alarms went off for a second, then stopped as the systems adjusted. The Admiral held onto the rail, surprised but impressed. "That's impossible," he said under his breath. "We've never moved like this before." The unknown ship on the radar began to slow down, then change direction. It turned away without firing a single shot. Maybe it wasn't ready for a ship that could wake up and charge like a beast from the sea, or maybe it had just been testing their defenses. Whatever the reason, the tightness was safe for now. Lena sat on the floor of the engine room. Exhausted but proud, she looked up at the engine and smiled. "You did good," she whispered, "just like him." The Admiral arrived a few minutes later. He stepped into the engine room and looked around with quiet respect. "We were ready to surrender this ship," he said, "but you gave it a second life." Lena didn't say anything at first. She just looked at her hands, covered in grease, holding her father's old wrench. Then she looked up and said, "This ship doesn't need more upgrades. It needs to be understood. That's what my father taught me. Machines don't serve orders. They serve those who respect them." The Admiral nodded. "I believe that now." He paused, then added, "We still have a long way to go. But if you're willing, I want you here, permanently. Not just to fix the ship, but to teach us how to listen." Lena stood up slowly, her legs tired but steady. "I'll stay," she said, "but only if you treat this engine like it's more than metal, because to me, it's family." The Admiral gave a small smile. Then, "Welcome home, Engineer Solus," and, for the first time, Lena felt like she truly belonged not just on the ship, but in the story her father had left behind. Lena woke up early the next morning. She had barely slept, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. The events from the day before were still fresh, restoring the engine, saving the ship, pushing it to its limits. But even though the ship was moving again, she felt something unfinished, something hidden. She could feel it in the engine's rhythm, a slight hesitation, a quiet pulse that didn't match the rest. She walked alone to the engine room, carrying a mug of coffee and her father's old wrench in her pocket. The ship was quiet in the early hours. Most of the crew was still asleep, and those who were awake nodded to her as she passed. Some of them looked at her differently now, not as the outsider, but as the reason the ship was still alive. In the engine room, the hum was stronger than before. The lights were steady, and the control panels were glowing gently. But Lena didn't head for the panels this time. Instead, she walked to the far wall, a place no one had touched in years. She remembered something her father once said when she was small. "Every ship has a heart, but also a memory," he told her. "And sometimes those memories are kept where no one dares to look." She knelt down near the floor and opened a storage hatch. Inside were old parts, wires, and manuals, most covered in dust. But tucked behind a loose panel was a metal box, sealed shut with 2 latches. She pulled it out and sat on the floor, wiping off the dust with her sleeve. Her heart beat faster. As she opened it, inside were handwritten notes, sketches, and a small voice recorder with her father's initials carved into the side. Her fingers trembled as she pressed play. The recorder crackled. Then his voice filled the room, deep, warm, and familiar. "If you're hearing this, it means something went wrong," the recording began. "And I'm not there to fix it, but maybe you are, Moonbeam." Lena's eyes filled with tears. She leaned closer as the message continued. "This ship is more than its parts. I've built a backup system inside it, one that no one knows about. Not even the Navy. It's designed to protect the ship during times of great danger. But I couldn't finish it alone. I needed more time. The voice paused, then came back softer. If you've come this far, you already understand what others don't. You need to find the coil room below Deck 5. There's a hidden control node there sealed when the ship was first launched. That's where the backup system waits, unfinished, waiting for your hands, your mind, your heart. The message ended with a quiet click. And Lena sat in silence. She had never heard him speak like that. Not even in life. She wiped her tears and stood up. Her hands shaking, but her mind focused. She had a new mission now, one that only she could complete. She took the old manual and recorder, stuffed them in her bag, and made her way toward Deck 5. The hallways were narrowed down there, less used, filled with pipes and storage compartments. She passed old signs, faded labels, and locked doors. Then she saw a metal door with no name, no markings, just a dent in the frame where someone had once tried to open it by force. Lena crouched down and felt along the edge, just like she had in the engine room. Sure enough, there was a small mechanical latch hidden under the trim. She used her wrench to pop it open, and the door creaked slowly, revealing a dark room full of old wires and unconnected ports. This was the coil room, just like her father said. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from her handheld lamp. She walked carefully, avoiding loose panels on the floor, and soon found the control node covered in a gray tarp. Forgotten by time, she pulled off the cover, revealing a strange combination of mechanical and digital components. Her father had blended old tech with new systems parts she recognized, and some she didn't. It was half-built, with tools still lying nearby as if he had planned to return but never could. She sat down and began studying it, reading his notes, following the wiring. It was a fail-safe system, something designed to give the ship intelligence in crisis mode. It would let the ship respond on its own loss-just power, seal damage, even make route decisions if needed. But the software was incomplete. The system wasn't connected to the main controls. She worked for hours without stopping, her mind racing, hands steady. She adjusted connectors, rewired circuits, and installed missing parts using spares from storage bins nearby. It was like building a puzzle from memory, and every piece she placed felt like a step closer to her father, outside on the bridge. The Admiral was told Lena had gone to the old coil room. One of the officers looked concerned. That section hasn't been used since the launch, he said. Why would she go down there? The Admiral didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, because that's where the truth is, back in the coil room. Lena finally made the last connection. She held her breath and flipped the master switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the control node lit up with a warm glow, and the screens came to life. Lines of code ran across the monitor, some hers, most her father's. A message flashed on the screen, system ready for integration. She linked it to the ship's mainframe, and the connection was smooth, seamless. It was as if the ship had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the final key to be turned. The backup system was now active, and Lena stood back, her face full of pride. She whispered, "It's done, Papa. I finished what you started." At that moment, the ship's sensors sharpened, its power flow balanced. Emergency detection lights blinked and stabilized. The tightness was no longer just fixed, was evolving, becoming smarter, faster, and safer than ever before. And deep in the heart of the ship, something stirred like the memory of a man who had given everything for a ship he loved, now living on through the hands of his daughter. The tightness felt different now. Everyone on board noticed it. The lights no longer flickered. The walls no longer groaned. The engines hummed in perfect rhythm. Like the ship was finally breathing with ease. Something invisible had changed, but it was powerful, strong, and steady. Lena stood at the center of the coil room, her face lit by the soft blue lights of the control node she had just activated. Her father's design had been sleeping inside the ship for years, waiting for someone to finish it. Now it was alive, and the ship was smarter, more aware, able to make decisions to protect itself and everyone on board. The Admiral stood on the bridge, looking at the updated readings on the main screen. He turned to his officers and spoke in a quiet but serious voice. This ship isn't just running. Again, it's watching, thinking, adjusting. This is more than engineering. This is something personal. One of the young officers asked, "Is it safe, sir?" The Admiral replied, "Safer than we've ever been, because someone who truly cares built it, and someone who truly understands finished it." Meanwhile, Lena walked out of the coil room and made her way through the narrow hallways. The ship no longer felt like cold metal. It felt warm, familiar, almost alive. Every step she took echoed with quiet pride. She reached the engine room and checked the readings. Everything was perfectly balanced. As she stood there, she thought about her father, about all the late nights he spent building systems no one knew about. All those years, people thought he was just an old mechanic, but he had been building something far ahead of its time. Something with purpose, something with heart. She picked up the voice recorder again and listened to his final message one more time. This time, she didn't cry. She smiled. "I did it, Papa," she whispered. "I listened, I understood, and I finished what you started." Suddenly, an alarm beeped gently from the wall panel. Not an emergency, but a signal, an unknown object approaching. Lena rushed to the bridge to find the officers already checking the radar. The Admiral looked at her as she entered. "We have another ship incoming, faster this time," he said. "No ID, no signal, could be hostile." Lena's eyes narrowed. "Then we let Titanus protect itself. Let's see if it works." The Admiral gave a slight nod. "Agreed. Let's trust the ship." As the unknown ship got closer, the Titanus's new system began responding on its own. Without a single order, the defense shields came online. The targeting systems locked onto possible threats, and most importantly, the ship adjusted its own heading to avoid direct confrontations. Smart, quick, and silent. The crew watched in awe. The ship was doing things it had never done before, actions it had never been programmed to perform. It was like it had instincts, like it knew how to stay alive. The enemy ship circled once, then backed off, slowly disappearing into the distance. No shots were fired, no damage done. The Titanus had protected itself just like her father had always hoped it would. Cheers broke out across the bridge. Officers clapped each other on the back, relieved and amazed. Lena stood quietly beside the Admiral, her arms crossed, her heart full. She didn't need applause. The ship's response was enough. The Admiral looked at her and said, "Your father built a mind into this ship, but you gave it a soul." She nodded. "It listens now because it trusts again." That's what he always believed. Machines aren't just tools. They reflect the hands that build them. That evening, the Admiral called for a special meeting in the main hall. The entire crew was invited, and for the first time, Lena stood at the front of the room beside the ship's command team. The Admiral stepped forward and spoke to everyone with a proud voice. "This ship broke down because we forgot how to listen. We tried to fix it with machines, wires, and commands. But we didn't understand its heart. It took someone who remembered the man who built it to wake it up again." He looked at Lena, then back at the crew. "This is Lena Solis, daughter of Chief Engineer Rayanne Solis. She didn't just repair this ship, she brought it back to life." The room filled with applause, loud and long. Some of the same engineers who had once doubted her now clapped the hardest. A few even stood in respect. Lena smiled softly, not for herself, but for her father. When the applause ended, she stepped forward and spoke for the first time. My father wasn't just fixing engines. He was giving this ship a way to survive without fear. He believed machines could sense care, feel pressure, and respond with trust. That's what he taught me, and that's what I followed. She paused, then added, "You don't need to control everything. Sometimes you just need to understand it. And now, Tightness understands us too." After the meeting, many crew members came to her, not to ask questions, but to thank her. Some shared stories they remembered about her father. Others asked if she would teach them her ways, and Lena said yes. Because this wasn't just her father's story, anymore it was hers too. That night, she went back to the engine room 1. More time before sleeping, she placed the old wrench back into the secret panel where she had found it. Gently and with care. "I'll visit often," she whispered. "But you're safe now. You're not alone anymore," as she closed the panel. And stood up, the lights dimmed slightly, not because of a problem. But like the ship was nodding in agreement, a quiet hum filled the space, soft and peaceful. Like a heartbeat saying thank you, and Lena walked away slowly, knowing the ship would always remember the man who built it, and the daughter who helped it believe again. The Tightness now moved with strength and grace, like a living creature that had healed from deep wounds. It cut through the sea calmly. But with power beneath its skin, the ship was no longer just a machine. It was something more, something reborn. The crew had changed too. The people who once doubted Lena now greeted her with respect. They asked her questions, took notes when she explained the ship's systems, and even began to treat the engine room like a sacred place, a room that held history, memory, and purpose. Lena walked through the ship every morning, not as a visitor anymore, but as someone who belonged. Officers saluted her. Engineers smiled at her. Some young cadets called her chief, even though she never asked for a title. She didn't need one. Her work spoke louder than any rank. The Admiral called a special meeting 3 days later. They were now returning from their mission successfully, with all systems back online. He stood in front of the ship's crew and announced a new department, the Solar Systems Division, named after the man who had changed the Tightness with his vision. And the daughter who had brought that vision to life, Lena, stood in the back. During the announcement, quietly watching, she didn't step forward, didn't say a word. But when the Admiral looked at her from the stage, he simply nodded once, and she nodded back. That was enough. They understood each other now, not just as officer and engineer, but as people who had shared something impossible and real later. That night, Lena sat on the deck, watching the stars. The sea was calm, the engine steady, and the sky clear. She held the small voice recorder in her hands, the one with her father's final message. She had listened to it so many times now. But tonight felt different. She pressed play one last time, and her father's voice filled the air. "I knew you would come one day, Moonbeam," the voice said. "And if you're listening to this now, then you've done it. You've done more than I ever could. You gave the ship something I only dreamed of, hope." Lena closed her eyes, the stars above blurring behind her tears. She didn't cry from sadness. Not anymore. These were tears of peace, of love, of completion. Her father was gone, yes. But his work lived on, and not just in the ship, but in her. The next morning, she asked for permission to go ashore when they reached the harbor. The Admiral agreed without question. She didn't explain where she was going, but he didn't need to ask. He knew it was personal. A few days later, she stood at a quiet cemetery on a green hillside, a small bag over her shoulder, and the sea far behind her. She walked between the rows until she reached the stone that read, "Rayan Solus." There were flowers already there, left by someone else. Maybe, or blown in by the wind. She smiled, sat down beside the stone, and unpacked her bag. Inside was the wrench with her father's initials, the voice recorder, and a folded copy of the ship's new engine plans with her own signature next to his. She laid them gently at the base of the grave. "Hey, Papa," she said softly, The ship's running again. She's smarter now, faster, kinder. I did what you couldn't finish, but only because you showed me how." She sat in silence for a while, the breeze blowing through her hair. "They know your name now," she added. "Not just the Admiral, not just the crew, everyone. And they respect you, finally, the way I always did." She paused again, then reached into her jacket and pulled out something smaller metal badge, newly made, with her name and the words, "Chief Systems Specialist, Sola's Division," she placed it next to the wrench. "I thought you might want to see it," she said with a small laugh. "I didn't ask for it, but they gave it anyway." A soft wind blew through the trees above, and for a brief second she felt something warm, quiet, like a whisper that only her heart could hear. She closed her eyes and smiled. She didn't need to hear the words. She knew what they would be. "I'm proud of you, Moonbeam." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, she stood up, brushed her hands clean, and said goodbye, not with sadness, but with strength. She turned and walked back toward the harbor, where a Navy car waited to take her to the next ship. Her journey with the Titaness wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Navy had asked her to lead a team to teach others how to listen to machines, how to understand old systems, and how to work with trust, not control. And she said yes, not because she wanted attention, but because she believed in what her father had taught her. Weeks later, as the Titaness prepared for another mission, the crew stood in formation, ready to depart. Lena stood near the engine room, checking the readings. Her tools were ready, her bag packed, and her heart calm before leaving the room. She looked up at the engine and whispered one more time, "You're not alone anymore." The engine hummed back at her, steady and warm, like it understood. And as the ship moved forward into the horizon, cutting through waves and wind, it carried with it not just steel and wires, but memory, legacy, and love. The Titaness was alive again, because the daughter of a forgotten veteran had answered the call and reminded everyone that the heart of a ship is not made of metal, but of the people who believe in it.